Hello and welcome back to season 3 of Survive and Thrive podcast. I am your host, Imani Henrik, and on this episode, we are looking at what it takes for independent public interest media to evolve in a world where journalism is tested every single day. Across the globe, newsrooms are closing, trust is really shrinking, and the space where citizens once met to understand their societies are disappearing. And we are diving into the growing of phenomena of news desert, communities where there is no reliable local journalism at all. And the very important question is when these gaps emerge, people are pushed towards social media for information. Politicians communicate unchecked, quite different from the past years. But also, disinformation spreads with no one to debunk it. Public conversation becomes polarized, and the democratic fabric weekends. Our guest today is Izabela Moi, Executive Director at Agência Mural in Brazil. Welcome, Izabela. And first of all, tell us more about Agência Mural.
Thank you, Imani, for having me, for inviting us, and for having an interest in hearing what we have been going through. Agência Mural it's a non-profit local news organization founded in 2010. We work with the underprivileged communities of what we call the metropolitan area of Great São Paulo, which is the largest one in South America, and just like a 500,000 inhabitants, larger than Mexico City. It's urban agglomeration of 39 cities, and 85% of this territory and of the population are low-income families. And you can consider all those communities news desert or almost news desert.
I was passing through your website. It's in Brazil, but I loved the fact that it has English translation. And what took my attention is it's the journalism that focused on it's about for and by the peripheries. So my question to you is, why does Brazil need a media outlet like Agência Mural?
I am a journalist with 30 years of profession now, and I use it to work to mainstream newspapers. And what we understood at the time that we started as a blog. We understood that we were reporting only about the financial and political center and for those people. So we were not including the narrative and the stories about the low-income communities, which are the peripheries, which is 85%, it's the majority. So we are not including their stories or their narratives in the mainstream narrative of the city. And it's still like that today. Like, of course, today, Mural is not the only one anymore. There are other smaller collectives and smaller organizations, and they're doing the same work, not only in São Paulo, but across the city, across the country, in other peripheries and in other low income areas. But it's still, I struggle to not only depict these communities as the center of violence or the center of poverty that only needs help. So we are trying to change that, and really showing that there are citizens living there that pay their taxes and that need attention from local government and local businesses and everything. We have a small full-time team. And then we have a network of what we call local correspondents of 70 people living in the neighborhoods that report for us. And the small team of around 13 people today. So I am the only one that does not come from the peripheries. And everyone, so that's a rule in our organization, everyone lives in one of those communities that we serve. So that changed the perspective of our work too in the daily basis.
Okay, so you are the only one who is not in peripheries, right? But you know the life experience in there, right? Can you tell
Yes.
me what's life looks like there, especially when it comes to freedom of speech and journalism work?
If you can like imagine, like if you live in areas where the whole narrative and the whole information comes from a center where you don't belong, and where the reality does not match with yours. And before Mural and other collectives, the only stream of information that we had produced about those areas were about the violence that existed that and still exists. Like, we don't deny that. Or religious groups putting out narratives of religion. So what it happens is that people don't know their neighborhoods, don't know their neighbors, like don't understand or don't believe that they can change their lives. They do not feel that they belong to the same local administration and that they have rights. So it demobilizes people. It doesn't make them feel that they belong, that their taxes are the same that other citizens. So there's a whole, when information doesn't exist, it also disengage you from reality. So
Yeah, that's really sounding interesting and shocking at the same time. But what does it actually really mean for people to live in news desert? And what disappears when local news is gone?
well, everything, like you don't relate to reality. That's the thing. São Paulo is made of 39 cities, and 10 of them are completely news deserts. And then there's the communities that are news deserts too. So we went to one of the smallest cities that is a news desert, and we spent a week there just before the mayor elections to see how it went. So to get information about political candidates, for example, people had to go to the church or to talk to in a bar with people or rely on, and like the pamphlets that were being distributed by the candidates. So this city is being governed by two families for centuries and they just swap between the two families, one election after another. And and they are part of like the very small rich center, and the whole population, which I can say that is 90%, is really hijacked by whatever comes from their mouth. Like, they own the only radio station of the city. So that's why we consider a news desert, because it's really no news.
I see. So
So you
where do
don't do
people
anything
start?
for your city. You don't really participate in anything. You are just submitted, like you just
You
you're
just
a
sit and
victim.
watch and waiting for whatever is coming, right?
Yes, you don't, like, you take agency out of people, when you don't have information. You don't do anything. You just think you live in a natural world, that it's like that and it's going to be like that. And the only way to change things is to move out.
Where do people now turn for information when local journalism collapse? I know you have told me that people are going to the bars, to the church, but also what I've got is that this all coming with a lot of risks, especially on disinformation and misinformations. So, what really are the risks that comes when people relying mostly on such kind of maybe few groups of discussions, church, and social media as well?
Social media is a big problem in Brazil, like a problem, and a good tool if you know how to use it. But the problem is, um, with the collapse of media, at the same time, we are not talking about that. But in the global south, we really have to talk about that: the collapse of public education. People are less cultivated, are less educated, so they go to social media. Sometimes, like, I know illiterate people that have their mobile phones, that go to Facebook and to Instagram and get their news because it's on audio and video. They get their news from direct from social media, but because they haven't had like a critical thinking education, or they don't have enough education even like to tell if somebody is lying to you or not. What we are fighting is really like it's more than the production of disinformation and misinformation. Is that we are not looking at the public education system that is also going rot. So with the two at the same time in crisis, we are really afraid of presidential elections next year. It's really scary. But we
Wow.
cannot talk about journalism without education system, at least in my country. I'm not going to say the whole global south, but my country, that's the reality.
And Isa, what does the absence of local news do to political accountability, public debates, and polarization in city communities?
I think I have been thinking about polarization as the lack of dialogue tools. You know, like the less educated you are, the less knowledge you have of reality, or the less information you have, you become more like you become attached to your values, or at least to what you think you understand. So cliches, jargons, like uh, very superficial statements. Sometimes people cling to it because that's how they feel secure about how to enter a debate or a conversation, or even to have a posture in front of reality, and polarization is about that. Like, if you don't have enough tools and instruments to go into a dialogue, you simply become supporters of what you think is reality. And that's why I think that's one debate that we journalists are not including in our big crisis that we are seeing. It's not only about the trust of audience, it's not only about the machine of disinformation and disinformation. It's also about the collapse of educational systems that does not match our age of information anymore.
Tell me, how does your grassroots reporting model help to rebuild trust in communities that have long lived in news desert?
Yes, so we have it's a small full-time team, 13 people, and then 70. It works like international correspondence. It's the same system. So they live in the neighborhoods they report from, and they report about, and they are residents. So they know the community, they know the neighbors, they know the community leaders, they know the problems, they know the good things. So since the beginning, we started, this is the model that we rely on. And because they see, like, our audience see that the person who is reporting, and if you go in our website, you're going to see the team. They know that they live, that they are not parachuting, that they are not talking from an outside point of view. So the audience sometimes, so we have cases and stories about, the audience coming and writing to our reporting and say, I want you to tell this story or that story. So the trust is built because we know the context. So, and one in our a newsroom handbook, the first thing that we say is that we have our first source is not official source, is always the people who are living in the territory. So that's our first priority source. So we really tell stories from the point of view of people living in the communities. So I think, and it's been 15 years, so
Really, really impressive is I've just thought of Tanzania, where we have local media houses But the surprising part is that most of them do not really broadcast or share the news from the local people. And the audience are always blaming them, you just broadcast what we hear from national media or big media houses from Dar es Salaam. So, my question to you now is what kind of information or news do people turn to Agência Mural for?
It's really local news, so they're gonna see the artists that are work. Like, we have two rules in our editorial handbook. Like, we don't report on violence because all the mainstream media does. So they don't need more of that. So we don't report on violence or crimes, or and we don't report what we say the good deeds from big organizations, because there's always a marketing stunt that is coming and giving something to a poor community, and they want to get space in the news. So we don't report those two stories. And apart from that, we report everything that happens, good or bad, in the neighborhoods. So what they look for us because they want to see their realities somewhere. And we have a lot of messages coming from the audience saying, like, I didn't know there was this community, I don't know, theater going on right next to my house, and now I take my kids to it, and if it wasn't you, we didn't know it existed. So these are the kind of things. Now, like, since this year, we started also working with AI a little bit to get a public information database that is already available, and to produce what we call a little bit of service journalism. So it's about climate change impact information about, like, for example, the air pollution index by territory. So we are doing that. We are doing a little bit about rain risks. We are going to start to do something about the public expenditure by territory too. So we are trying to break down the information that is public and already available, and only if you have you're more savvy and you can dig in the computer, you can access this information. So we are breaking it down, changing the language, and distributing it to the territory, so they know more about where they live and they can act. Especially during local elections, our website always goes down because of, like, access. Because what we do is we do a list of everybody who is candidate, and what they have done for their territories. And so we do a little more a service journalist during elections. So and especially it happened twice in the last two elections. So, and the just one day before elections, our website goes down because of traffic.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
so this year I hope it won't. Well, we have been reinforcing the website to get it, but it's just because they rely on us, and they know, like, they can get the information without any political bias or anything.
Isabel, that looks like you are a lifesaver in Brazil. What's your plan for the coming elections?
So we are gonna try to work and distribution through WhatsApp and SMS this year to be prepared for next year. So let's see. We are in the middle of trying a new thing. Like, we are gonna enhance the role of the local correspondents, for them to become more like local influencers, to get them more closer to their audience through WhatsApp groups. So this is a test. I'm not saying anymore. We're gonna start next year. So
Wow. I'm recalling in Tanzania, we have just come through from elections, and we experienced not at least 6 days internet blackout. Is it the same in Brazil? Because
A
You were
blackout means like a shutdown of the internet?
shut down, of course, total shutdown for 6 days. People were not able to access anything, were not able to use internet money, digital payments to communicate.
I
People
hope
who are
not.
living abroad were really struggling to communicate with their families and all that. So my question to you is how is the situation in Brazil during elections, and how
No,
do media
I think
houses really work? Because here in Tanzania, apart from internet shutdown, there were demonstrations where, because of the internet and really unfriendly laws that govern the media space, um, journalists were really not able to report what was going on, and this has led now the media houses in Tanzania, the local media houses and journalists, are looking like a hell. Nobody's respecting us anymore now because we didn't really um, report exactly what was going on, how many people were died, and all that. So people missed their important right to information and right to question anywhere. Anyway, so how is the situation in Brazil for your experience during election season and freedom of expression and also flow of information and internet availability?
I think that's what we went through with the last president, not this one, with Bolsonaro. He even tried to block people from going to vote, for example. So that's the kind, and journalists were persecuted, and they were threatened, not only in court but really in real life. So it was really really dangerous. But now we have a democratic president. So from this point of view, I think it's going to be easier for us. We're going to be able to do our work. I'm more afraid of the evil machine of and how this information machine and the misinformation machine is gonna work, because they earn money. You know that the platforms are very happy to distribute this kind of speech and misinformation. So that's why now the discussion in Brazil, there's a lot of discussion on platform regulation and how they will have to behave during elections. And there's even a discussion that is a little bit shut down, but I think there are small pockets of people still trying to push it. It's how the platforms will have to protect journalism activity. And at least, like, for example, I'm pushing now, like I'm in a group and trying to push it for public policy that will help sustain the journalism industry in Brazil, the independent industry, because we are numerous, but we are very fragile. We never know if we're going to survive one more year.
I understand that I assume that the places that you are working are not news desert by chance, but there's reasons behind. And my question would be, what are the reasons? And maybe there are little money to invest in public interest journalism. And how do you even stay viable with this tough environment?
I don't know, Iman. We are a miracle. Especially because like we are talking about, like, I think we are the most unequal country in Latin America, at least. Like, so we have very small number of people, very very rich, and then I would say 85% of the people, like I would say, there are low income communities and low income families. And of course they don't want to get information in to this public and to this audience, because that's what I was saying. Information makes us able to act. Information gives us agency back. Information makes us engage with reality and see that this is not natural. This is just something that we made up, and then we can build something on that, and we can build something different. uh, so our viability is, it's really a fight. It's a fight every year. Like we rely on grants, we rely on partnerships. We do partnerships on republishing articles, for example, in bigger media. So we try to get a model that has many revenue sources. So we do events, we ask for donor contributions, like smaller donors. That is not our audience, it's really people that have money, because we cannot ask for subscriptions. We cannot put a paywall, because we are exactly fighting what we call information inequality, and our audience doesn't have any money. And it's in the long term. I have many dreams and projects, but we cannot never plan ahead of 1 year.
Yeah, let's hope it gonna work. You told me that there are other organizations that are doing the same work as yours. If you may have the experience, because I know maybe you guys are meet and sharing experience, how do they thrive anyway?
We just organized co-organized the third conference of independent journalists from the peripheries and favelas of Brazil. So it was
Wow.
last week in Rio. While in Rio there was the whole thing with the police shooting poor people, and I think everybody knows this news. So for 3 days there were more than 30 organizations coming from all states of Brazil, organizations similar to ours, most of them smaller and more fragile than ours. But we could fund this conference to exchange experience and to exchange and to form a network that is going to try to sustain each other, at least in terms of knowledge, in terms of uh, tools exchange, in terms of like how we can help each other in capacity building. Because all big cities and small cities in Brazil have the same problem. It's only the elite who can pay for information that has information.
So, Isa, when we look at traditional journalism education, do journalists get to reflect on the gap between peripheries and the rich parts of society and their own bias in it, in their trainings? But also, if there is access to information a topic at universities?
No, not in Brazil, but we have been called more and more to give classes or to participate in debates within universities, to talk exactly about that, to talk about like what are you reporting about in a city as big as São Paulo? How do you look at the city? What is important to report? We are very like we have been reflecting very deeply in the last years about what is local journalism, and how do you do a local journalism that serves the people who live in the local. And yes, we when we come, we talk about access to information. We talk about the lack of money to access information, the lack of money to pay internet. Like if you imagine, our audience is almost 90% mobile, and mobile not through internet, but with the phone, because like they don't have internet, they don't have computers at home, you know. So we talk about that, and we talk about how you feel part of the same city if you have enough information about this city. And like we always, yeah, we discuss about that. So we have been called more and more to come to university events or university seminars, or even to give classes, just to talk about our way of reporting.
Apart from universities, do journalists really get time to reflect on the gap between peripheries and the rich part of the society?
If you don't come from those areas, no, you're gonna like the syllabus is very technical, and it's very centered on how you do your stories. So what they do, you tell like, look at your life, look at your reality, and then try to tell it. And if the majority of the students, or at least like the in the with the best universities with they come from families that have a higher income. They are not going to look at the peripheries. They think at the peripheries as the place where people that work in their houses live, and that's it.
So, in those dialogues in universities, you just told me that there's no access to information topic in universities. Is those debates only enough to prepare responsible future journalists?
I'm not sure if they're enough, but it for me, the invitations are a proof that they are changing the way they're thinking, that they know now that there is something missing. So yeah, like just one small detail for local correspondents, for example, like the local correspondents that come to work for us. Like every year we do a selection process because you cannot pitch a story and just write to us. So you have to go to a selection process every year where we select 30 people. And we train these 30 people in the way we do local journalism. And the only rule is they have to be 18 years old and they have to come from the communities we serve. So they spend with us 6 months where we train them for free in the local journalism we do. Our editorial line, the handbooks, the tools, like they participate in conversations with journalists that we invite or specialists, and then they do their first story. And so some of them stay with us after 6 months, some of them choose to go away and they find better jobs. So we have been trained till now. We've trained 700, local journalists. So I think that also is changing the media ecosystem because they go to work in other media and they say, hey, there's another kind of story that we can do about São Paulo.
That's impressive. Thank you so much, Isabel. A lot to learn from Agência Mural, but also from Brazil. And we thank you so much for taking your time and speak with us at Survive and Thrive. Thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. I am Imani Henrik. Until next episode, bye bye for now.
Thank you, Iman.
Thanks for listening to Survive and Thrive, the Media Viability Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and make sure to hit like so that other listeners can find us as well. For feedback, send an email to dw-academy.surviveandthrive@dw.com. You can find all the information in the show notes.